All right, so today I'm having a hard time finding the pens that I need because I had a couple, but they're kind of dying. So I'm going to be using a pencil today, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about abstract shapes and kind of how I use them in a lot of my work. I definitely tend to have a kind of set number of shapes that I use, things that I like using in general, and I guess that I kind of repeat in general. And I think after enough time of creating the kind of work that I do, then you start to develop some things that you like the feel of. There's definitely a lot of geometric stuff that I use, and then these kind of soft floral shapes mixed in. I always love that contrast between the two anyway. And it's kind of nice actually to switch up the material and medium for today. I've been using a lot of ink pen and doing a lot of drawings with those lately. They kind of tend to disappear from the studio. My kids, I think, borrow a couple of pens here and there. I take a couple out of the studio, and before I know it, pens have disappeared completely. But that's all right. We'll make do. And I used to do a lot of drawing with pencil actually when I was young. And then I moved into pen because I liked the kind of high level of contrast in pen and ink. But pencil is so this is just a mechanical pencil, but having that gradation in your line work is actually kind of nice to return to. I think that's why drawing is so complementary to learning how to paint in general. And it was such an easy transition. But anyway, the types of shapes that I do usually like creating are definitely geometric in form. And they take on a little bit of a different life in every different scenario. But I'm kind of just starting in one spot and building out from there. I was starting to overthink it a little bit too much when I started this video because I want to talk about a few different things, but the main thing is just to focus on just experimenting with shapes that you're kind of comfortable with. I think it takes a little bit of time to develop that comfort and to kind of know have your go-to set of different, I don't know exactly what you would say, I suppose just kind of stylized elements that you replicate in your work. I think it's good to try out a lot of different types. One of the most kind of important things that I did when I was young in trying to find my style was that I got a commission job from a friend of mine to do like a tattoo design, and it was really kind of great because she wanted a specific like style to be utilized for the piece. She kind of liked this like decorative, almost Art Nouveau, like mixed with like Victorian type of like line work and curvature and that kind of thing. And sorry, I'm getting distracted. And I had to kind of study what those shapes looked like for a little while, just to see if I could kind of get it done correctly for the mixture of elements that she was kind of requesting. And I actually really liked how it turned out. And she really liked it too. And I realized after drawing, I would like draw later on. I continued, creating things afterwards, of course, and the work would start to embody like a few of the things that I had done in that drawing for her, and it was kind of crazy how even that one project had like an effect, because there were things in there that I really liked that I hadn't really thought about doing before, and kind of using lines in a specific way. So it was really nice that, you know, it had such a positive effect on the work, and it was something that I didn't expect, something that was like different. And I think that experience kind of reminded me of like why it's important to kind of push yourself in directions that you wouldn't normally go in. So with that being said, then, you know, this is now, you know, after years of kind of trying to do that, I've kind of come to see like a few of the things that I really like doing. I've come to kind of realize what my favorite pieces are, little fragments, abstract elements and shapes and things that I like always kind of including. And this piece will be kind of a focus on that. I usually like to go back and forth a lot. Like I'll jump in between different shadows and things in a piece, even if it's like a little sketch that's just like in a sketchbook. I'll go from like the dark areas to the light areas. And a lot of times I think I've noticed that maybe certain things don't quite add up as far as like how light and shadow affects elements that are next to each other. Because obviously, as I'm sure most people have heard, like you kind of want that to be consistent, but I feel like most of my work is maybe, or at least this type of thing, you know, that they're really just meant to be like design elements. They're not supposed to be something that's like represented in reality, I suppose. So with that in mind, like it's okay that they aren't completely reflected. I mean, I'm still using things that would kind of be, you know, considered like traditional shading or something like that, working from darks to light. But I don't have in mind that it has to like map out and be, you know, 3D or something. Like it doesn't have to occupy like space in our reality necessarily. I think that's why geometric forms are so interesting to me, because they kind of remind me of like crystal formations. And when you look at crystals, the way that light and shadow interact with each other are kind of, they're almost confusing sometimes to see, because it doesn't look like it exists, or that it's like they reflect light in such a specific way that they don't necessarily map out like in our own reality. To me anyway, that's what I thought. I mean, I liked that idea because it almost like takes the pressure off of having to like make something in the beginning when I was making art anyway, to make something that makes total sense as far as like a light source and shadows, and or if there's multiple light sources or something's reflecting off something else. Or I always loved being able to just like pick up a pencil and draw, and maybe some of that would be coming from that place of just wanting to create and not wanting to have to depict something every time, even when it's like something that's abstract, if that makes sense. So with that, then seeing things like crystal formations were really kind of exciting, because it made me think that something that does exist in reality can still not, it doesn't have to make sense visually. I mean, maybe somebody else has, you know, a different take on that, but that was just kind of my interpretation when I first kind of saw. I was looking for inspiration for abstract elements that were things I could use for my other work. So this is becoming kind of, maybe a little too similar in some of these shapes. So I'm trying to differentiate and come up with like some other types of things I could bring in here. I have to draw with the pencil more often because I'm not as used to, I'm not as comfortable. It'd be good to practice that a little bit. I haven't used a lot of floral shapes here, so I'm going to kind of bring that in a little bit. Let's see. I don't want too much uniformity amongst everything, so I really like doing these kind of random shapes and then starting to build lines within them. They almost remind me of those shapes that grow on trees, or those, it's like a type of fungi, I think, or like a mushroom, that kind of thing. They always remind me of that when you repeat lines like this. So let's see, we need something a little bit larger here to bounce things out. A lot of this type of work, it can be, I guess, having to think about how to bounce things out so that it makes sense as far as composition goes. It does feel like it needs something a little bit larger here. And I'm getting a little bit lighter here too. I'm not sure what direction this is going in quite yet, but I think it'll kind of work itself out. Even the way that I apply lines, that changes a lot too. There's some lines that are very harsh and kind of, I'm putting a lot of pressure into what I'm making, and then other lines are very soft and kind of fluid and flow outwards in just random ways. And whenever I make a random shape, like I can usually work it back in to everything that's surrounding it. So like I wasn't, that was kind of a random spot to put this, but I think I can kind of make it work here. There's not a lot that's like heavily solidified yet. So, and the darker that some of the shadows get and shading gets, then the more you can kind of make something match up to like where you placed it. I do like using these like circles. It creates this like weird, almost like, it reminds me of like the way an eye fits between muscle or something. I think that's kind of an interesting shape to create and add to like abstraction. So I'm a little bit happier with this now. It looks a little bit, as we get more warmed up, I'm kind of able to connect a little more with what's going on here. And it looks a lot better from like different directions too, which is kind of always interesting. I had these little scribbles on the page before. We'll try to incorporate those. I mean, if you're working in a sketchbook, you kind of just like bring in whatever you can, and nothing's really like sacred in a sketchbook. I mean, it should just be kind of random. I think I'm saying that while I'm also like, certain pieces I've done have been, they take up a whole page and I don't really touch the page afterwards, but that isn't super normal. I mean, it shouldn't be like the full essence of your sketchbook. You should just be kind of always working things out and not being afraid to like touch the page again and add stuff to it later. And that kind of gives sketchbooks like a unique beauty too, because they're so filled with contrasting elements and weird things sometimes that it almost has its own like aesthetic in that sense. But as far as, you know, from a skill point of view, it's important to always be adding to it and trying to push yourself. Let that be the space where you're like doing things that you aren't comfortable with. Because if it doesn't work out, it's the pressure is so low. No, you know, technically nobody will ever see it again. Like it's I try to tell myself that, because sometimes it can be upsetting when things don't work. You know, when an idea just totally fails, or a set of. I mean, I remember looking at some of my other sketchbooks recently because I was trying to organize things, and you know, so I forget how bad some of that stuff was until you like see it again. But I remember it's like it was a lot of the bad works were on their way to something else. You know, they led to something else that was really helpful later. So, or it helped me kind of like learn and understand something about my own technique or the way I was shading something that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. You know, you don't want the learning process to have to be on like a painting where you wished it had gone differently or that you did something else with it, you know. So it's useful in that sense. I try to remind myself of that, and it's the reason I'm trying to do more sketching, really, because I don't want to just kind of become stagnant in the way that I approach things. I'd like to push things in different ways, and there's so much room to grow and develop things. And I guess I worry that I don't do enough of the preliminary kind of, you know, trial and error on something else. There have been a couple of paintings where I feel like it was, unfortunately, you know, a lot of the trial and error happened in the process of the painting. You can cover it up, but if it's something that is, you don't want that to be, it kind of like, there's something in the process of a painting that when it is fresh, when it is just an idea that has not been worked over a million times, you know, that stuff, there's something to be said for that. I mean, there's a big difference between work that obviously had to be figured out while in process, like too much so, and it definitely kind of like kills the look and the feel. Not that you can't ever cover something up, but you know what I mean. It's some of the best paintings or works that I've done have been really quick. The idea and the essence of a piece were like created like really fast, and they were executed quickly, and I moved on to the next thing. It's almost like it happens so fast you're not even like pay attention to it. It kind of like takes place. So you want all that beginning work and slow kind of like, you know, like the slow slog of developing the idea to take place in something like a sketchbook, for sure. That's my opinion anyway. It's other people might have different ideas about that, but so I'm gonna bring a little more shading to this. I feel like this shape should be a little darker and stand out a little bit more, but we'll see how it turns out. I think some of these are, you know, looking fairly they're looking stronger. I mean, there's even a lot of kind of variety in line work here. There's stuff that's pretty soft and loose, and then things that are getting a little tighter. So I think that's good. I have these kind of weird eye shapes here. They're kind of happening all over, so. But we're good. I'm kind of happy with where this has gone. It's reminding me of a few things that I've been trying to work towards a little bit. There's some variety here, and I feel like that's good. A lot of my sketching has become almost too just not having enough variety, kind of stagnant, unfortunately. So I wanted to kind of use this video to kind of showcase a few different ways of thinking about shapes and how to move things around, combine different elements. There's some geometric forms here. There's some very natural forms here. And they all add to each other. And I'm going back in with kind of a darker, this lead is very soft. It's like a 0.7 lead, so it allows for some darker line work here. Some of these lines will just trail off into kind of nothing. And maybe this is like it almost reminds me of like a tree, the way some of these lines, almost like a meeting of roots or something, and little interesting outgrowths that take place. When you're thinking about different patterns and things to incorporate in your work, you definitely, it helps to have some reference as far as going into a piece, thinking about keeping your eyes open during the day for anything in your own natural environment, but then of course anything that you've seen online, even patterns from something else that you've liked. I mean, I've seen like textiles that have been interesting to me. Classic illustration from like scrolls or something that I'll see like flipping through things in the library. I think I drove past a really interesting set of like trees that were exposed, like roots being exposed, like from halfway out of like a hillside, because the dirt and natural debris were falling off the hill, that were all these branches and roots were kind of twisted and tied up together. I mean, it was pretty incredible looking. I couldn't see it for very long because I was driving by it, but it caught my eye for sure. I think as time goes on, and the more you pay attention to that stuff to utilize for your own thing, like your artwork or something, the better you get at like being able to save those things like as like visual memories or something. I mean, hopefully. Sometimes I forget everything and I'm extremely forgetful, so I do my best to think about them, because there are some really interesting things out there, even in the natural world. So there's a few things being bounced here that I'm kind of happy with. I'm kind of coming to a close almost, just because I'm wondering if I keep going too much in this direction. I mean, it has to trail off in some way. I don't want to just like completely like, I could fill out the entire page and then you're thinking about other focuses or another focus on the piece as a whole. But for now, this kind of got me warmed up. I'm going to go into some painting in a little while, so maybe this is kind of a good place to stop. But you can see that there's like a buildup of things here. And if anything, you know, if there's something that I could have gone into, definitely write a comment below or something, and I'll try to go over some of the things. Somebody mentioned a long time ago that they wanted to see some floral work, so maybe I'll work on some of those things next. But the soft lead really helps with adding some darker shades and values here. And like I was talking about earlier, like having a specific light source or like something that is reflective of, you know, reality, I suppose, like something that reminds you that you can like grab onto it or touch it or something like that. That comes into play with things like this, like where I'm shading while thinking about how light could be affecting this object, but everything else around it doesn't necessarily show that, if that makes sense. There isn't an obvious light source here, even though there's a lot of shading and there's highlights and things like that. So that's kind of what I'm referring to, is that you know, when you're comfortable with shape and you know, and you're aware of like where a light source or how a light source should be affecting something, then you can make decisions like that in real time, like as you're drawing, and not have to worry about it too much. Because each individual shape has like a feeling that it's being affected by light in some way, but that it doesn't as a whole necessarily have to be realistic or something. It doesn't have to like map onto reality. The rest of kind of what occupies this look and feel and like makes sense is just purely like design and form and contrast between everything else. So it's just something to keep in mind that I think is helpful. I think it's easy, like there's usually a lot, I hear people talk a lot about, you know, light sources and things like that, and that does apply and is important to think about. But when you're doing specific types of works, you know, when you're drawing like a face, or you're trying to draw something that from realism, you know, that's supposed to be realistic, then we're talking about something that, you know, you should take all those things into consideration. And when you're painting, but when you're just creating pure design, something that's purely design and abstract, and is just contrasting shape and form, then I don't think it's as like, it isn't integral or as important in the same way at all. That being said, you know, shading can be really helpful for creating texture, and you know, with that texture from light to dark, you get a feeling of what's being affected by light. But anyway, that's my small rant that might have trailed off into something that didn't make as much sense, but that's hopefully the point comes across. I have a lot of these kind of light lines here. I'm trying to decide which ones to focus on. And I mean, I could just kind of continue this down to almost like, it looks like a kind of conglomeration. I mean, some of these things, you know, you can allow yourself to be really loose, and then you just kind of draw in and darken up certain areas. Let things flow as much as you can. Then you kind of get an idea of like where things are in relation to each other as far as, I mean, I'm thinking about a couple different things here. I'm thinking about composition, but I'm also thinking about shapes that I actually want to develop. It's definitely a lot of back and forth usually. Maybe it'd be better to trail this off, you know, into a different corner of the page if I am going to continue and kind of fulfill this entire area. I'm not sure yet if I will. The more I'm drawing off of the main part that we just worked on, the more it feels like this is going to be like a, you know, a satellite shape or something that's kind of hooked into it in a certain way, but and maybe that's okay. I mean, you can't really make it incorrect. I mean, it can just kind of take on its own life here and just become whatever. I think that's why certain sketchbook pages are fun, just to fill out like completely, like where the entire page is filled up, you know? It's almost like the part you're paying attention to the most is the part that's not filled. That becomes like the focus, because everything else becomes like uniform and so filled up and detailed. But I don't think we'll push it like that far for this. I just wanted to kind of see this shape here. It's either empty space, depending on how I fill in lines next to it, or it becomes its own shape. Now, if it becomes its own shape, it's pretty similar to this one here. So I have to kind of decide on like what to do there. I mean, if I can keep things really loose and kind of wispy and cloud-like around this and fill up this shape over here maybe. I liked those kind of circular, almost eyeball shapes. So I'm kind of bringing a lot of those around in here. But overall, I mean, this is good shape development for what I was looking for. And it was good to kind of force myself to do something with a pencil, which I'm not doing a lot of lately, but it's kind of reminding me that it'd be good to get back into doing some graphite work and maybe doing a little bit of charcoal and bringing in some other mediums that I haven't worked with a ton lately. Kind of like that. There's some kind of strong rectangular forms here, might be good to bounce things out with. I think those are helpful. Anyway, thank you all for watching and listening, and if there's anything you'd like to see, definitely leave me a comment below, and hope you all have a good day.